fully vaccinated
Me too.
and boosted.
Yeah, I still think I'm just trying to be safe. Sorry. All right. Good morning, everybody. This is the Compensation Committee meeting for December the 8th, 2021. And with us, we have Mr. Johansson from the Johansson Group. And we welcome him here. And he's Timber. I don't know who all is on the line, but do we have Squire Muller and Squire Sebastian on the line? Yes. Yeah, we have Squire Michael Muller and Squire Sherry Sebastian on the line that are members of the committee. We also have some other people on the line. So this is to talk about what the Johansson's group is doing as they are hired to look at our compensation, develop a compensation plan. Thank you. And I turn the floor over to Betty Jo. I'll let you lead us from here.
Good morning. Mr. Johansson is our provider for the compensation study. What we're going to be going over today, or what he's going to be going over today, basically, is we're going to use my job description for an example. And then there's a packet that I sent out on Monday, basically, it's job evaluation and salary administration program, 2 different documents you'll be looking at. So he's going to go over how he is going to be evaluating in the point system of the positions of all the titles. We ended up with over 100 titles, actually. There were some newer titles at some other offices that was in there. So we ended up about 100 titles. So what he's going to do is basically go over how he's going to be evaluating those. At the end, especially the committee members, if you all have any questions, please ask Mr. Johansson those questions at the end of the meeting. I believe that's it.
Okay.
Okay, and so this is Mr. Blair Johansson.
All right. Thank you, Betty Jo. Judge Wells, appreciate the opportunity to be here and to take you through a couple of different documents that we'll be reviewing this morning. And then we'll also be visiting with the elected officials and department heads today and tomorrow to look at their job descriptions to make sure that they're current. But one of the things that we want to do is make sure you're familiar with the job description format, because this will be a consistent format that'll be utilized for the county for each of the positions within each of the elected officials areas or department directors, department heads, functional areas. So on the screen, what we have is the heading information. We're going to use the human resource director position job description as our example for today. And again, I'll just take you through the structure and the format of the structure so that you'll become familiar with this job description format on a going forward basis. Heading information. So we have Franklin County, Kentucky Human Resource Director job description. Typically within a job description, you have heading information that gives you some information about the position from standpoint, is it exempt, non-exempt from overtime? The department for the position, what department they're located in, who it reports to, the location of the position, date prepared, revised dates, and then in this particular job description, we have safety sensitive because some of our clients have safety sensitive legislation on marijuana laws. And so here we can actually take that out until such time that it's warranted. So for right now, we've just put safety sensitive no, and you'll see that in all of your positions that I'm pretty sure we selected no until such time that that becomes an important issue for the county. Then for job descriptions, you have a general statement. So it'll be a general description of the position. So responsible for management of all human resources, related functions and services as directed by the county judge, deputy county judge. Overarching statement, we have that for each of the positions. This is an opportunity where the elected officials and department heads may want to expand a little bit more on that statement so that you have that opportunity to provide a little bit more information if you want to give a broader statement than what we initially started with the job description. After that purpose statement, then it gets into essential duties and responsibilities. And they're listed. We have room for 1 to 25 different duties and responsibilities. And then if you have more than 25, we can put that in the last part of the list. So here's a list of various duties and responsibilities associated with the human resources function. And we'll just kind of go down through that list. And then as we go on to the next page, it continues. And then this system, the last statement is always perform any other related duties as required or assigned. And so that's also going to be on every job description, that we have a list of duties and responsibilities, but the last one's going to give you the opportunity to make sure that you're covering all bases when it comes to duties required and assigned. Now we'll move into qualifications. Qualifications within the system, we're going to look at what's the minimum education experience required for the position. So what is expected for that position from the standpoint of what level of education and what amount of experience. And we've got general experience and we have management experience. So if we were looking at general experience, we're looking at related general experience. If we have a statement about management, it's usually because there's a functional management role for the position, or if it's a professional position and it's working with outside contractors, or let's say in engineering where it's working on projects, we also give it management from a project perspective. So that's typically where we show up with management, is usually functional management or project related management. Again, all this is minimum. What's the minimum required for you to have someone come in and do the job, and your expectations of what they need education experience to be able to do the job?
Blair, would there be specificity in the management part as well as the general part, specificity as you have managed so many employees or something like that, as opposed to just management? You would define that a little better?
Yes, under supervision later on in the
Okay.
job description will be more specific about how much.
Yeah, okay.
Management and supervision. So what this does is just says, okay, someone has to have some level of experience that comes with them if they're going to function in this particular job, if it requires management.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
You bet. No, that's a good question.
Yeah.
You bet. So, okay, so education and experience, and then we're going to go into 3 skill areas: communication skills, mathematical skills, and critical thinking. So this is also an opportunity for the elected officials and department heads to review what's been selected, because we've selected the communication, mathematical skills, and critical thinking based on reading the job description. So this is an area where we want your input to let us know if you see anything that you feel like is missing, or maybe something that doesn't need to be in there based on the job itself. So communication, mathematical, and critical thinking. All right, and then we have another area where we have required certificates, licenses, and registration. So what's required and what's preferred.
Mhm.
So some positions require it, and others just say, hey, we would like to have someone who has that related certificate or license or registration, and those are listed. So this is an area where if we are not providing enough information, we want the information that pertains to the job. All right. And then software skills, what type of software skills are required? And so in this one, we have intermediate, alphanumeric, data entry, database, HRS systems, payroll systems, spreadsheet, and then on basic would be accounting, the presentation, PowerPoint, word processing, and typing. This is also another area where we can be a little bit more specific to the job and what's required for the position. The next area is initiative and ingenuity. And when we're looking at the job description, you're going to see some wording and formatting that ties back into the job valuing system. So those two are linked together. And that's what creates the consistency of the job description, is that the formatting is the same, but what's required of the position and the levels of what required are different. And that's what helps us to identify each position's value based on what is expected and required for the position. So under initiative and ingenuity, we have supervision received, planning, and decision-making. And this is an area where the elected officials and department heads can look at the terminology that we've selected to see if it's appropriate or not. And you'll have the ability to look at the job description that we have now based on what was provided by Betty Jo and what you provided up to date, and allow us to bring that current, as well as look at the job valuing process and what we've selected to see if we've selected the appropriate level. And the wording will be tied into the level based on the rating system. So you'll know what we've selected. So supervision, receive, planning, decision-making. The next category is mental demand. Now, what level of mental demand is required? Some positions, because of their being repetitive and it's not as complex, then the mental demand doesn't require as much mental demand to be able to complete the job. All the way up to where it's very intense from the standpoint of both planning, from the perspective of short-term, long-term type planning, when you get into director or official, the elected official type positions. Analytical ability and problem solving. So this one, anywhere from just the basics of not having to do much problem solving because the job doesn't require it, all the way up to what we call oversight and general oversight. For this system, your general oversight would be your elected officials because they're reporting to the magistrates. The oversight would be your department heads and directors. And then moderately directed would be someone who reports to a director or to the judge. And then that works its way all the way down to a position that doesn't have much problem solving associated with the work. All right, and then Judge Wells, on the responsibility for work of others. This is where we can be specific about the scope of responsibility and how many employees are being supervised by the position. We start out with no supervision, so the position doesn't supervise any employees. 1 to 3, 3 to 7 employees, 8 to 15, similar work, not as complex, 8 to 15, more complex work, 16 to 25, all the way up to some pretty good sized departments.
Okay.
And so this gives us the feel for if there is management supervision, how much management supervision.
Right.
Based on.
There's a lot of difference in managing one person as opposed to 8 to 10.
You bet. Correct. And that's where, from a weighted point value perspective, no supervision, 0 points as we move up that scale based on how many folks are being managed. And that's cascaded responsibility, not just direct reports, but the whole cascaded responsibility is how we're looking at that. Right. And then the next one's responsibility for funds, property, and equipment. And on this one, the first 3 levels of this particular category would be not responsible for funds, equipment, property, occasionally responsible, but we're not putting a monetary value on it. We start to put a monetary value on it when we get to level 4, 5,000 to 150,000 on an annualized basis. And that might be equipment, might be computer equipment, might be the truck, might be the equipment out in the field, depending on what we're working with. So typically, let's say if we're working out someone equipment operator, we're giving them credit probably for level 4, 5,000 to 150,000 because of the equipment they're working with. If someone's got a budget or they're taking in funds, each position has some level of responsibility for funds, equipment, property associated with that position. This goes on up to positions that have responsibility from a department perspective, where it starts to move on up towards, let's say, 10 million to 25 million, or depending on your budget, whether you're above 25 million, maybe up to 25 million to 50 million, depending on the position. All right, so that's responsibility for funds, equipment, and property. Accuracy, if an error occurred, what impact does it have on the organization? And we go anywhere from level 1, where we're talking about if you're have a cash drawer and you're balancing the cash drawer and you can find the error and fix that on your own, that's level 1. If you need someone to help you fix it and it's in the department still, level 2. 3 is if an error occurs, it starts to impact the general public. And it starts to have more time associated with the error. All the way up to level 7, where it's a legal issue, potential legal issue, it's a significant impact on the county if an error occurs. That typically happens up at the department head level because you have higher levels of accountability for doing things correctly and managing accuracy at that level. So it goes anywhere from just basic one individual balancing out the cash drawer all the way up to those responsible for departments and divisions.
Blair, let me ask you a question. As we're going through this, I'm thinking application for John Smith.
Right.
What you're showing us is from our perspective and not what was be on the application. For our perspective to evaluate an application. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
As I look at
Yeah.
these categories, I'm
Right.
thinking, okay, the applicant is not going to see these, but we know about these.
Right. This is our internal reference to each job individually and
Okay.
what you expect of that job and what are they responsible for and expected to be responsible for. Each job individually.
Okay.
Yeah.
We know what, go ahead, Dave.
Jeff, after, this is actually gonna be an internal job description, so after we hire the person, they will actually receive a copy of all of this as their job description. Right, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, so we wouldn't share this necessarily for the applicant.
Right.
We would share it once you've hired
Right,
an individual. Now, this helps us, the job descriptions helps us guide us to who to look for from an experience and education perspective. But once someone comes on board and they're in the position, this is our guide of what we expect of them. And it's also the value that it creates for the county for that position based on complexity, funds, equipment, and property, supervision, problem solving. So all the combination of this allows us to determine the value of the position for someone who meets the requirements for the job. It sets the value for the position. Movement and pay for the position is depending on your budget 1 year to the next year. But what's responsible for the foundation is what value does that position have as we look at that job description.
Okay.
Does that answer your question or what else?
Well, it clarifies a little bit. Yeah,
Okay. All right.
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
and Judge, I want to add another thing, what we would do is we would take this job description and create an ad, an employment ad from the job description, not the entire job description like we do now.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
basically, when we hire the candidate, when I sit down with them and the department head, we will go over their job description with them, what we're going over right now.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be exactly the same verbiage.
Yeah, correct. So when you're using this out to the public, it's what we call a profile.
Yes.
And it's typically your purpose statement, some duties, some top line duties,
Mhm.
education experience requirements, and that's about, or certifications, things like that. That's it. Usually you have a profile as opposed to the full job description.
What we have now is just a job description, and that's for internal, that's for external as well.
Right,
Right now, you're creating an internal and an external.
right. So what this does is it formalizes the process of the format and what's expected based on the compensable factors. But then you use that internally. Externally, you would use a profile that narrows that information down.
That's what I was
Right. Okay.
wondering here.
Because this goes into a lot of detail that maybe the general public doesn't want to see when they're looking at. a
Right,
profile.
right, okay. But the only thing we have to base on is what we have today. And
Right.
This is adding something which is beneficial for us.
It'll work because it gives you, it formalizes the process and internally it creates some consistency of how we look at
Yeah.
positions.
Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
anyone looking at the job pretty quickly can tell a little bit more comprehensively what's the value of that position and what do we expect of it internally.
Okay,
Right, and then the next area is accountability. And on this one, we have freedom to act, annual monetary impact, and impact on end results. This one is really based on positions that have decision-making authority to impact end results for the county. So how much independence do I have to operate independent of supervision. Further up in the organization, we have less direct supervision because we've got responsibility and freedom to act based on that level of decision-making. So freedom to act. Annual monitoring here, we're talking about not funds, equipment, and property. We're talking about either generating funds or saving funds for the county. What kind of decisions can I make in my position to either save funds for the county or to generate funds for the county? And what does that look like on an annual basis, year-to-year basis? And then impact on end results. This has 4 levels. The first 2 levels are non-decision-making positions, and the 2 upper level are decision-making for the department, and either assisting in decision-making or the final decision maker. So impact on end results. All right, and then moving on to public contact and employee contact. So our external, what type of contact do we have with the public? So what's the frequency of that contact? What's the nature of that contact? What's the importance of that contact? And so that's what we're looking at: frequency, the nature of the communication, and what's the impact of that communication. And that's helping to help us determine what kind of contact. Internally, my first level is just being courteous to my coworker, first level. And then all the way up to setting the culture for communication in the organization at an elected official department head basis. So anywhere from being courteous to my coworker. And then as you move up those levels, I'm either communicating within the department, I'm communicating outside of the department, or with other elected officials. And as you move up in that communication and the impact of that communication, you move up to a higher level on internal communication. All right, the next one would be use of machines, equipment, and computers. When we talk about platform software, we're talking about Excel, Word documents. We're talking about complex machines, software. When we're talking about out in the field for equipment, out in the field, if it's equipment that's fairly easy from the standpoint of driving, but we're not introducing computers to work with that equipment, we'll also call that complex. But whenever we introduce computers that are helping us to work with the equipment, or whenever we're using software that's beyond platform software, then we call that highly complex. Most of the positions that are of a non-IT basis are anywhere from complex to highly complex. And then we get into IT positions from help desk all the way up to the IT director. So that's what we're looking at on machines, equipment, computers. All right, and then the last part of this for the job description is important from the standpoint that it's tying in with the physical demands, the work activities. So we're looking at the American Disabilities Act from the perspective of what are the requirements for the position. So working conditions are anywhere from an office setting, working condition, all the way out to internal, external, life-threatening. So when we got into some of the jail positions and the sheriff positions, then we start to introduce the internal, external, and what we mean by inside, outside, life-threatening. But on the least amount of points is being in the office setting, and like right here, and that's your normal setting. Okay. And then that moves up based on the working conditions. Right, and then environmental conditions. So typically, if we have a position that's working out in the field, then we're looking at all types of a laundry list, and we'll see that based on your job description, where if they're working around equipment, are they outside part of the time, most of the time? And so based on your job descriptions, we've selected the levels that we think are appropriate. And that's where we need your feedback, because this is pretty specific and government regulations from the standpoint that we want to make sure we're accurate about working conditions and physical demands for the position. So environmental conditions and then physical activities. And so that finishes out the description. And then in your job descriptions, depending on the elected official, department head, and the job description that Joe sent to us, some of them had additional information we copy and pasted that into the database for each job if that was present. If there was not any information about additional information, then this would be blank. It would just say additional information and wouldn't have anything underneath it. If there's something there, then that actually came from the current job description. So we'd also want to make sure that any information and additional information is current and it's correct. So this finishes out the job description. This is the formatting that we'll see for every position in this order. So what's nice about this is once you get familiar with the order, then you know pretty quickly where to look if you're looking at something specific to either purpose statement, duties, or some functional area or the compensable factors. So any questions about the job description format and the process, Betty Jo?
Is this a time, I'm asking you this, Mr. Johansson, is this the time that I could ask 2 questions on the job descriptions and
Yes.
ask the committee if this is something that we should put in? Because there's 2 things that, is this the appropriate time?
Mhm.
My opinion on the job description, we do need to add the classification to the header. That is like the 1A, 2A, 3A. We've been transitioning those over the last 2 years. The last 2 years I took over the job description, so we would like to have that added at the top, the classification code.
Code. Okay.
Yes, sir,
Right.
please.
All right.
Well, so the question I would have to follow up on that is, are we going through this process? Are we going to have codes like that, or are you going to be redoing those, or what do you see coming from this
Right.
plan?
So a lot of them depend on the current codes and how they match up with grades and placement, or the actual grade structure. Is it tied into a grade structure or not?
It is, and that's what I told you, that's very outdated.
Right.
That we did that in-house several years ago, so yes, those will need to be updated.
Right.
Some of those are not correct.
So the answer to that would be to see what coding you have in place now, and will that be pertinent or align with where we're headed? And if
So either way, I guess the question
Right.
is more generic to that. Do you see jobs based on, and I guess it would be payment for jobs, compensation for jobs based on these codes?
Okay, that's good. For some organizations, they try to tie it all together with the code.
That's what we've done so
And
far. is
It
just-
might be the initial because it's a certain category, and then it might be a number because that's the grade that it falls into. So there's some reasoning behind that code. Others it's just the code for that position. It doesn't relate to a grade structure. Where we have a grade structure is we might have classification code and then actually a pay grade, if you want the pay grade on the job description.
Where we've been hurt,
Right.
clearly you're going to see this if you're not already seeing it. And all of us will attest that since we've adopted this code or this classification system,
Right.
all we've done is tried to fit a round peg into a square hole, and it just is not working. It doesn't work. So
Okay.
that's why I kind of interceded to say,
you bet.
this is what we're going to have.
Right, so let's migrate to something that works, right? And so we would have
Amen.
a frame of reference of what you have now and where we're headed with the structure, with the pay structure, grade structure, and how does that tie back into the code if we want it to or not. So, but the answer to that is we can be fluid about that, but let's make sure what our endpoint is it's something that works.
Okay. Now, I've been asking questions, Betty, so everybody out there, department heads, and elected officials, anybody else, please chime in and let us know if you want to ask a question, because this is for all of us, especially you department heads. This is very pertinent to you all and how we move forward. So don't hesitate to ask a question if you have one. Go ahead.
Okay. You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. So any questions? Anybody have any questions about the job description format or
I have one. You were talking about, setting the job on like the cost of the equipment a person runs. What about like the building values that we manage or operate?
Right.
Good point.
Yeah, so when we were looking at this particular factor, what we're looking at is not only the value, but also what's the risk level for decision-making that could result in damage or misappropriation or just not making a good decision. So what's the risk exposure? So the question is as an organization, do you give credit for the full value or some percentage of that value because that's your risk exposure, not the whole building, if you will? So from consistency purposes, as an organization, we'll work with you to determine how you're going to look at that factor. But there will be some value, maybe not the whole value, but some risk factor value for the building, that piece of equipment, the funds that you're responsible for.
In Jeremy's case, so if you narrowed it down to someone that we were looking that may have HVAC experience, so what Jeremy is saying is that the heating and cooling units within our building, do you have experience in fixing those? And would you, there is a liability in fixing those.
That's
If
correct.
they go down, everything goes down. I
Right.
believe that's what you're saying.
Right,
Isn't it, Jeremy?
yeah. So would you give that value based on that preference of 5,000 to 150,000 because that's about what it would take to replace at a one building or a couple buildings, however you want to look at that? Or would it be more than that because of how much is out there that they're responsible for? So again, it's just how much exposure do you think that individual, that position has for that particular factor?
Yeah, because each building kind of be valued different. The work in the building will be different.
Right.
Say the courthouse compared to, a smaller building.
Right. So typically our first pass is probably the 5,000 to 150,000 because that gives a pretty good band for employees that are responsible for equipment or facilities. And then 150 to $1 million is the next level. And we might have some that'll get to that level because of multiple buildings, multiple systems that are responsible for, or funds that they're responsible for. And then the next level is 1 million to 10 million. So somewhere between level 4 or 5,000 to 150,000 to level 6 is probably a good area to capture most of the employees.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So any other questions about the job description?
Tamara, can you see, there's somebody, I think it's Jake or.
Yeah, it's Rich, sorry. Camera's kind of wobbly here. We come up with these qualifications for these positions. Is that going to lock us in to have the applicant meet those qualifications? Because we promote from within, usually train within house.
Right. Yeah. So what we say is what's the minimum? So typically someone internally a lot of times has more experience. But what let me show you on that particular paragraph, what we do to address that issue. On education experience. So for equivalent combination of education experience. So we've had some individuals where, let's say the position requires a bachelor's degree and 5 years of general experience. Well, we have someone who doesn't have a bachelor's degree and they have 9 to 10 years of experience. So the combination of those two allow that person to put a little bit more emphasis on general experience and not the education. So it's the combination of the two that allow us to open that up so you're not locked down.
Okay, thank you.
Bet. Other questions?
Squire Muller.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Johansson, for being here with us. Question, and I think this is a good time to ask, at what point will the employees be involved in the process? Would that be during job descriptions or what are we looking like there?
Yes. Yes, sir. Squire, is it Mueller?
Yes, sir.
So what that the way that works is when we go through the review of the job descriptions with the department elected officials, what we'll do is have them ask their employees to provide feedback on the job description so that and typically we get that feedback when they're sitting down with the employee and going over the job description. So the next few weeks would be a critical time for them to ask employees for their feedback, so they're part of the process.
Okay, so it could almost be like the department heads could ask their employees to maybe write their own job description to see what they think it is potentially, correct?
Right, to provide input. Typically, the employees will weigh in on purpose statement and duties and responsibilities. And sometimes they'll weigh in a little bit on education experience, but primarily we want the employees' feedback on what is it they're actually doing in the job.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so will you help Betty in a little more organized, specific way to send out an email to the department heads to contact the employees specifically asking these questions?
Judge, I'm gonna do that after today. This was a kickoff meeting just to go over.
But
the
you
job
already
description.
know what you're gonna be?
I do.
Okay,
I
all
already
right.
know the
Yeah.
process. and
All right, good.
yes,
Okay.
I do.
Yeah, okay, I'm not trying to step on toes.
No, that's okay.
Just stuff I don't know.
And I'll answer that too. I answered it in court actually last week. After today, actually, I will be getting with the department heads to make sure they go over their job descriptions to make sure they're correct. And then I'm gonna ask the department heads to get with their employees. And then when the employees meets with the department heads, I will get back with Mr. Johansson on any changes that he needs to make to these. And then that would be the final evaluation of those job descriptions.
Okay.
Right.
Good deal.
Help, okay.
Yeah, and that's a good point because this whole process is to get us the most current version of the job
Exactly.
description in our software. So then that way, everybody's current and they feel good about the content of what's there. And we'll reemphasize that in our meetings with the elected officials and department heads today and tomorrow.
Okay.
When we're meeting with them individually.
Okay.
So,
But will it be up to the director or what are the head to determine what that actual person's, I mean, you can have a little input from the employee, but they could get pretty out there,
Right.
trying to beat the next person.
yeah, the important part is to get the feedback and then how you incorporate that into the job description is up to the department head and elected official to do that appropriately.
Yeah, I think there'd be some consensus from the department head and the employees on.
Right.
I didn't know
Yeah.
if it had to be
Yeah.
what they said or.
No, I think there's some give and take,
Yes.
but ultimately the department head would say that this is. We know that all of us know out there that we hire someone for X position and X position ends up, especially in the county government where we don't have that many employees, it ends up starting here and going here, just getting more and more duties and more. Robert Hewitt is an example of that. And Jeremy, every one of you out there are examples of starting here and then becoming very wide and different than what you were hired initially for. So I think we have to take that in consideration.
Well, and that's why in this particular system, we limit the number of duties and responsibilities to 25, which is a pretty good list of duties and responsibilities because once you get past 25, then we're looking at a task list. We're not looking at duties and responsibilities. So we really encourage folks to stay within that boundary if they can.
Robert, you'd feel good if you only had 25. wouldn't you?
I have a question. So let's use Robert for example. If we were gonna replace Robert today, we would put out a job description of what we expect a planning and zoning director to do. However, because Robert has additional skills, he has taken on the other tasks. So how do we handle his job description
Right.
based on the duties he's doing now, based on what we would hire someone to do? Because
Right.
he does serve as a project manager, but planning and zoning typically does not serve as project managers.
Correct. So it needs to be what the person's doing today for it to reflect what you're expecting of the position. Right now, we still are looking at minimum education and experience requirements because we have some people who are very mature in the position and we have someone who's maybe new that's coming in that doesn't have as much maturity in the position. The key to this is what's our minimum for someone to come into the job? Now, if duties are expanded because our knowledge, institutional knowledge has grown and now we can accomplish more, then that value should go from what we call minimum to maximum in pay based on person's progression from minimum coming in new to the job and 10 years, 15 years into the job. That should progress with pay in the job itself. But the minimum requirements for the job is what we would want if someone's going to come into the job. Now, what we may say is that someone who's mature in the job may be actually filling 2 positions.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Potentially.
we've got several people, a couple of them sitting in here that feel,
Potentially. So if you have a change, then there has to be a decision made. Are we going to fill the position at the mature encompassing? And what's the value of that?
Mhm.
Or do we back up and say, okay, we've got entry level for this functional area, and then we have entry level for this functional area. So we actually have 2 positions to fill it with someone new with the skill sets.
okay.
All right. Okay, so
Wait a minute, Squire Muller has a question.
Thank you, Judge. So just to clarify, so I think it's important that the employees, the team understands that we're trying to create the job positions, not individual people's jobs. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yes.
Yeah, so I just, so even when the individuals sit down with their department heads, they're helping create, you know, let's say we have 5 different levels within a department. They're helping create those levels, not individual levels, correct?
Yes, for the position.
Personal, not let's use instead of individual, use personal. Like,
Right.
this is what Joe Smith does right now. So Joe Smith comes in and says, well, I do this, this, and this, but that's not necessarily what that job
Yes, it's
it is for.
it's the position.
Yes, right.
The
right,
focus is
yeah,
on the focus is on the position
Yeah,
itself.
yeah.
Yeah,
And then-
I want to make sure that everybody understands, not us, but you know, all the employees and team members understand that's what they're helping create. Thank you.
You bet. Yeah, good question. You know, key to that is to focus in on the position itself.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, let's switch over, and I'm going to stay really high level on this because if you don't have a copy of the job valuing system, then we want to make sure that Joe gets one to you. But I'm going to take you through it. Go ahead.
That's what I sent out Monday. Committee members, elected official department heads. I sent out an email Monday with 2 attachments.
Are you able to, let's see, I think I need to, how do I get this one? Take that out. Let's go to. I think so. Let's see. Is that? If you'll help me with this, I'm going to be able to show that one. So I think I have to go back to the share. And find the document.
Betty Jo, while they're doing that, can I ask you a question?
Yes,
Our meeting this afternoon, is it on the same link or do we need to come down there?
it's the same link.
That's all I needed. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, on the screen, though, it may be a little bit hard to see because this isn't large print. Let's see. I don't know if I can expand that a little bit on the view.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm with you. So I can do it. So I can do it here. Thank you. Okay, so on the screen, I'm just going to take you pretty quickly through what we call job evaluation, salary administration program, our job valuing system. And on this particular system, there's 15 factors. You heard some of this when we were going through the HR director's job description, when we were talking about experience general, experience management, education, initiative and ingenuity, mental demand, analytical ability, problem solving. Those are all in the area of what we call knowledge and skill requirements. And then responsibility for supervision, funds, equipment, property, accuracy, and results are all under responsibilities. And then our internal communication with the public and employees, and then efforts, machine and computer operations, working conditions, and physical demands. Those are the 15 factors, and the levels that are associated with those factors are in the subsequent pages. So we'll quickly, just briefly go through those just so that you can see. This system was built with a little bit of a narrative that shows or talks about what we're looking for when it comes to that particular factor. So experience general. And when I was talking about minimum experience, range, learning time. So there's a paragraph in there that tells you what we're looking for in that particular factor. And then there's levels. So experience general might be if we have someone who's working in an entry-level position, not much experience required, we might look at someone with 0 to 6 months of experience, and that's level 1, all the way up to 16 to 20 years of experience. And again, minimum. So typically, when we're working with a county or a city or a different client, we'll probably see somewhere between level 1 up through maybe level 12 is typically where we naturally can fall based on general experience. And then management experience, factor 2, again, functional management or project related management, if it's a position that has that type of project responsibility. All right, and then factor 3, education. On this one, we're anywhere from less than high school, level 1, all the way up to a Juris Doctorate. So we're working our way from less than high school plus, 2 years of college, 4 years of college, technical degree, graduate degree, and professional degree. What's required for the position? And I think most of your job descriptions had that information in there. If it wasn't present, we read the job description and kind of got a feel for what we thought would be appropriate. And that's again where we could get your input. Okay, initiative and ingenuity, factor 4. Again, on this one, we have 3 sub-factors. So we have supervision received.
Turn left onto North 66th Street, then turn left onto East Greenway Parkway.
It's okay.
Squire Sebastian, you need to mute your microphone, please.
We'll just travel
In
with
and
it.
out.
All right, so supervision received under immediate supervision, short assignments, regular check of work, all the way up to guided by the board of directors. So on this one, you're looking at positions of a relatively direct supervision relationship all the way up to the relationship with the board of directors or the squires. Planning, on this one, on planning, we're looking at a limited amount of planning. So for some positions, they don't have to plan. They just have the responsibility to carry out the functions of the job on that particular day, all the way up to planning for larger numbers of individuals and groups of folks. So anywhere from limited responsibility up to planning general assignments for the whole department. And then decision-making. On decision-making, same thing as planning. It's looking at not having a responsibility for decision-making all the way up to decision-making for a larger department, larger organization. And then we'll pass through the way we rate that. Mental demand, factor 5. On this one, it's just how much mental demand is required for someone to carry out the job. Some jobs are repetitive in nature, where once I understand the job, I can pretty much routinely do that job without thinking about it. I might even be able to daydream and still get the job done because it's that rote and it's functional. All the way up to
Ask questions on that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
On the mental demand, I mean, is that because what basis on mental demand? I mean, you're dealing with customers hands-on in front of them and have to talk and ask questions and have to be able to respond. I mean, who's judging the mental demand?
Yeah, so on this one, this particular factor, we're looking at concentration, how alert do we need to be? What's the intensity, frequency of the concentration? So let's say if I'm not dealing with the public and I'm in a manufacturing position and I'm fitting pieces together, that's different than if I'm out in front of the public and listening and paying attention to what they're saying. So based on that, that's a good example or a good question, because we move up towards moderate to close mental demand as we get into that. So it's based on the nature of the work, and it's based on what's happening while we're doing that work. And so that's a determination by the department head, elected official, and with input from the employees. How much mental demand, how alert do I need to be to get the job done? Okay. And then as we move up, like close mental demand and very close mental demand, we're building responsibility for department, logistics, planning, things like that, that make that go higher. So when we get to the very top, comprehensive and very intense, strategic operational management functions, both short-term, long-term periods. So we're basically trying to be able to evaluate a position mentally from basically I can do the job and daydream and get the job done all the way up to strategic, long-term, short-term planning is the scale. So good question. Analytical ability and problem solving. We're looking at strictly repetitive, moderately repetitive, moderately structured. The first 4 levels are of a non-professional or supervisory type position. When we get into level 5, directed, supervisory, and professional skills. And as we move up to moderately directed and oversight, you start to look at functional management roles when we get from supervisory to moderate directed, oversight, general oversight, and then minimal oversight is guided by the board of directors or the magistrate. So elected official typically would be our minimal oversight, and department heads, general oversight or oversight, depending on the functional responsibility of the position. All right, and then supervision or work of others. This is the one where Judge Wells, we were talking about how much scope do we have on supervision. So no supervision is level 0, and then supervision of a small group, 1 to 3, 3 to 7, 8 to 15, 16 to 25, similar diversified activities, 25 plus. And then it moves all the way to where I think we have probably a couple areas where we might reach level 9, where we have multiple departments, 3 to 5 supervisor supervising 50 plus employees. So that way we get our scope of supervision based on the elected official or department head's functional area. And then factor 8, responsibility for funds, equipment, property. This is where we're having that discussion where we're looking at budgets, we're looking at buildings, we're looking at equipment, and what kind of responsibility the position has. First 3 levels, as I mentioned earlier, they don't have a monetary value. It's not until we get to level 4 where we're looking at 5,000 to 150,000 monetary value. And then we move on up level 5, 6, 7, where we get into the millions based on responsibility for funds, equipment, and property. All right, and then factor 9, I'm sorry.
Is that a hand up for Squire
Magistrate
Sebastian? I
Sebastian.
don't know. Is that a hand? Are you trying to ask a question?
Yes, sir. I've been on the phone when it's letting me in and out of the meeting, but I've had a couple of questions and not been able to answer them as I have called in. So I'm at least in a kind of the top of a hill now, so it's giving me video access. So I did have a question about steps and grades, and maybe when the phone cut out, that may have been answered. Mr. Johansson, thank you for joining today. And if you've covered that already, I can absolutely follow back up when I'm in a more stable coverage area about grades and steps. And then I also wanted to ask a question about particular job descriptions. not writing the position based on the individual that is necessarily in these positions now, because some do a variety of other tasks that are outside of their respective area, and you're looking to bring in an individual. We may decide as a court that we need other positions involved in county government to handle specific tasks. So it's kind of a two-pronged question there. And if you've covered that already, I'll be happy to just follow back up again, like I said, when there's more stable coverage.
You're gonna have to follow back up, Squire. We couldn't understand.
Absolutely.
We couldn't understand what
Absolutely.
you asked. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry you couldn't understand it, Judge. I'm
you-
happy. I'll be happy to follow back up. Like I said, when I get in more stable coverage, because I realize I have more questions than probably my ability to ask them with this kind of coverage is going to allow. Thank you very much. I will follow up. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, yep. Squire Sebastian, thank you for your question. And we'll
Did you
follow up
get-
with you.
Did you understand her question?
I did.
Okay, well, go ahead and answer it because I didn't understand her question.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and answer it. And this ties back into the question we had about focusing on the position as opposed to the person. So our emphasis is to focus in on the position. And then as the organization changes or things change about the position, then those things happen and evolve. Either a duty's added or maybe some training is required and jobs will change over time. And then sometimes we'll have a new position. It depends on what's happening or what's required. But at this point, we're focusing in on the position and not the person in the position to make sure that we're focusing in on what's required of the job itself. And then on the question about grades, salary grades and ranges and steps, when we're starting this process, we're looking at what you currently have in place. If you don't have something in place from a consistency standpoint, then we start off by looking at grade and ranges and not steps. We have some organizations that have steps and some organizations that do not have steps. They just have grades and ranges. So a lot of that is dependent on the organization and what their expectation is when it comes to grade, ranges, and steps. But what we'll end up with is an opportunity to classify positions by a particular grade level. And then ultimately we'll have a value that each employee is making and where they fall within that grade and that range once we bring it all together. And we'll allow the market to help us validate that range structure and to look at the competitiveness of the structure.
Okay.
So does you feel like that answered your question? Questions?
I don't know whether she can hear us. Yeah.
It did. It did to some degree, because I know, and I asked this during the early processes, I'm sure you recall, discussed that as part of discussed that as part of any state conversation or any state the chance to get that off the ground.
Squire, if you could, we are definitely not understanding. You're very garbled. So when you get to a better spot, let us know. All right, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Judge. All right, so on the factor 9 accuracy, on this particular factor, what we've talked about earlier is if an error occurs, what kind of impact does it have for the organization? The first two levels are internal in nature. If something happens, it's primarily impacting the department and not outside the department. If we go to level 3 and above, it could impact another department. It can impact the general public. And typically, if you're a department head, elected official, you're up towards the 7 level. And then this works its way in a downward fashion based on the responsibility the position has over a group of employees, a department, or how much decision-making is associated with that position. And if an error occurs, what impact does it have on the county? All right, and then factor 10, accountability for end results, freedom to act. So we go from immediate supervision, established relationship, immediate supervision, all the way up to minimal oversight guided by the board for the magistrate. So again, we're working all the way up to elected official positions that are guided by the magistrates. Now, annual monetary impact on 10B is different than funds, equipment, and property. What we're focusing in here is what responsibility, what opportunity does the position have to either generate or save funds for the department or the functional area. And again, this one moves up in increments that go up pretty quickly. So none, degree 0, very small, up to 100,000 a year, small, 100,000 to $1 million, and then it moves up. So again, we're looking at how much decision-making authority does the position have to either save funds or generate funds for the county. All right, and then impact on end results. What I mentioned earlier is that the first two levels, minimal, modest impact, these are positions of the non-decision making on behalf of the department or the elected officials area. So minimal and modest, level 1 and 2 would be non-decision makers. Moderate and major impact are decision makers that are making decisions on behalf of a department or the county itself. So it's typically higher level professional management type positions when you'll see a 3 or 4 for impact on end results. Okay, and then contact with the public. No contact all the way up to extensive contacts with the public, where it's the frequency, it's the nature of the contact, and it's the impact of the contact with the public. And then 12, contact with employees, courteous to my coworker, level 1, all the way up to establishing interaction communications at a senior level within the organization. All right, and then factor 13, machine and computer operations. What I mentioned earlier is that complex, levels 3 and 4, part-time complex, regular use complex, platform software, or equipment of a non-computer nature when we're out in the field working with equipment. If we get equipment out in the field that's computerized and we're having to work with computers to manage that equipment, then we start to look at highly complex. If we're looking at software beyond platform software, then we're looking at highly complex. Our IT positions start up at level 7, help desk, all the way up to the highest level for the IT function, level 12. And then working conditions, we're anywhere from level 1, normal working conditions inside where there's controlled temperature, all the way to level 7 and 8, outside, inside, life-threatening. So potential hazardous working conditions based on the nature of the work. And then the last one, physical demand. These last two factors actually give credit for positions where there's a physical component or there's some type of life-threatening component to it, where the points are weighted higher for the physical nature or the risk exposure from a physical perspective. So this is where we actually give weighted points for someone out in the field that's physically working on behalf of the county. So anywhere from high diversity, low physical, typically your management positions, high diversity, low physical, all the way to highly repetitive and highly physical, where someone's physically working to get their job done. And they actually get the points, the higher points for the physical component. So these are the 15 factors that are embedded in the job description and have been selected. We've gone through that process of reading each of the descriptions, applying this, reading your description, and applying a level to it that we think is appropriate based on our experience. What we want is your input to make sure, did we target that correctly? Did we select the right level? I think we will be in the ballpark. We typically will be in the ballpark based on our experience, but this is where you know the job better than we do because you see it day in, day out. And you'll be able to say, yeah, that really does fit, or how about this looks like this is a little high or a little bit too low. So that's where we need your
I definitely think, as Betty mentioned earlier in our conversation about the header, that has to be up here as part of the job description.
Okay, good.
Don't you, Betty?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct.
And in the system, we call that a job code. And once we populate that, it'll come in another line
Okay.
on the top of the job.
Yeah, that's what we think.
So it'll definitely show up once we get it in the system.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions about the process and kind of where we are in the process?
We apologize for being late. I was teaching a class downstairs at the same time on elections. It looks like by the small little bit of overview I've seen, it's breaking down in a very exact structure of what the job title. I think it's going to be very eye-opening for the entire county to see. Once you structure it out, and you're not guessing at it anymore. You're not just giving the same response every year as an annual response. I think it'll be very eye-opening. So thank you for your time, and we apologize for being late.
You bet. Yeah, thanks for being here. You bet. And again, this is the process where we can meet with you individually over the next today and tomorrow and answer some questions and make sure that you feel good about the job description when you do the handoff.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Once you're finished, with this portion of it, will you then make a suggestion on the pay rate for the positions?
Okay, good. So here's how that all come together. So once we finalize, we go back in the system and make any adjustments based on what we had selected first pass. And so we'll get your feedback over the next couple of weeks, go back into the system and bring everything current. What that does is it creates a weighted value for each position based on the levels that are selected. Then in 50-point increments, what we call bands, so positions that fall within that particular 50-point band will become a grade. 50 points going from, let's say, 301 points down towards the bottom of the scale up to maybe 2,500 points, depending on the size of the organization. So we're doing 50-point bands until we get to about level around 800 points, because that's typically where we run into professional and managerial positions. And once we get to 800 and above, then we're at 100-point bands. Each of those will create a grade. And within that grade, each position that falls within the point, within that 50-point band or 100-point band, that's how we'll place them in the grade. We use your internal current rate of pay for each employee and create what we call an internal average. So based on your employee's current pay and points, we'll be able to look at what's your internal average from the position with the least amount of complexity and responsibility all the way up to the highest amount. Then we'll compare that against the market pay comparisons to determine if we're competitive with your pay and determine if we need to adjust it to be competitive with the market. Once we do that, then we can have each employee, each grade, and where they fall within that proposed structure.
Define market.
So before I leave the next day or two, I would like input on who we want to compare with. So entities that we're going to compare with. So the city of Frankfurt as an entity, I believe we want to compare their pay and look for like type positions compared to your positions so that we use them as an entity. Any other entities in the market that we want to compare with that would have positions like the counties, as far as clerical, management, equipment, different things that we can compare with out in the marketplace.
So
Jeff, what are your thoughts on that?
What are other markets that you've done, government, municipality?
You bet. So for counties and for cities, we typically will tap into other cities within the market area that you feel like are comparable size or you're competing with for labor. Counties, some contiguous or counties that are close by that you feel like we need.
In his particular case, he's the county clerk, so his that, so you would look at the county clerk's comparable positions.
I think, here's my concern.
Right.
120 counties, 120 different county needs, 120 different size, 120 different headaches and different types of problems.
Right.
So the scale is obviously different for lifestyle, whatever it might be, with these smaller counties that may surround us.
You bet.
So we have to look at a demographic that meets the same demographic that we are, the 55,000 that have 55,000 population problems.
Yeah, so it's the combination of your recruitment area, because we have to be mindful of where you're recruiting folks. So what does that look like? Does that look like a 50-mile radius, a 100-mile radius?
Right.
Because we tap into Lexington, we probably tap into Lexington, I would imagine, because they're close enough to compete for labor in Frankfurt.
We can't hire labor out of Lexington because we can't afford it.
Yeah, it skews it right
Okay.
there because they're higher.
So that's a good example. So when we work with, let's say, cities around Little Rock, the capital, so we have Benton, Bryant, Conway. And so we have this discussion, do we tap in and compare with Little Rock, North Little Rock? Because they can pay a little bit more because of the tax base. And so if we tap into them, we're also going to tap into other counties or cities of a similar size.
Right.
So we're not weighting all of it on Lexington.
Well,
It's to be mindful of what Lexington is doing, and should we at least have them as one column out of 12 columns weighted from a weighted perspective or not? I mean, because that's one of the things we want to decide is we have to be mindful of Lexington, because I think that they can recruit folks from Frankfurt.
They can recruit from us better than we can recruit from them.
Right.
Well, and I guess my example goes back to this. We don't have any from Fayette. We don't have any from Scott. Why? Because they pay more than we do. But we've got all kinds from Owen, from Henry, from
Anderson.
Anderson.
Right.
Because, I mean, but it's hard to compare us to Owen, which has 8,200 people.
Right.
And we're still in their workforce.
Mhm.
So I'm not in your business. I'm not in your.
Yeah, so what we do is work with you to determine, again, that recruitment area and what's a reasonable number of comparisons. We can handle up to 12 entities or published studies. And because statistically, once you get to about 12, you've got enough to represent a market average. Because if you get beyond that, then statistically, you really don't need more than 12 comparisons. We can handle 12.
Well,
So-
we're fighting our own markets right now. I mean, we're fighting the city and we're fighting the plant board and we're fighting
State government.
state government.
Yeah.
I mean, those are.
I mean, those are internally our main three markets.
Okay, and that's where we want your input, because we'll put that together. So we get what we call a market, true market average.
Okay, so will you also, once that is complete, will you look at ways to assist us in moving employees up the ladder? So say that we have a receptionist and we know that it's just always going to be a receptionist position. However, we want to retain that employee. Is there a way that we can retain them without just the annual COLA by making them various steps in that classification?
Right. So, and typically that depends organizationally, if you're big enough for that to happen naturally.
Mhm.
If it doesn't happen naturally, or there are other opportunities to switch from one elected official's area or department to another department, because they do want to be able to fill a position that's in a higher value grade.
We've also looked at longevity as being part of a process
Right.
too, and couldn't get past the first step of looking at longevity, but that is, the city does have a longevity piece in their plan.
Okay.
And additionally, something that we've struggled with each year is adding the COLA to the beginning salary, the starting salary, and moving that up to adjust it.
Right. So adjusting the structure by the COLA each year, correct?
The beginning salary,
Beginning.
adding it to the beginning salary.
For
yes.
each grade.
So just the beginning or the whole structure?
It would be the whole structure,
Okay.
right?
What we do currently, which keep in mind, Mr. Johansson, that it is outdated also, the salary ranges. So right now, we haven't been adjusting the COLA at the beginning of the salary and the end,
Mhm.
because the salary ranges are outdated. Now, I know you and I discussed, once we get where they're updated,
Right.
we really shouldn't be adjusting that COLA every year. Is that correct? Maybe every other year?
That's correct, because if you adjust it each year, you create compression.
We just stopped doing it recently because we did see that.
Right.
We were seeing that there were issues that were
Right.
happening.
So we recommend every 2 to 3 years to move the structure, but in between, adjust pay based on market adjustments or merit, depending on what you do.
Once we get the salary ranges correctly in those positions.
Right, because then once you have that in place, then it's a little bit easier to manage going forward once you have the structure in place.
How often should this be looked at?
Typically, every 2 to 3 years to go external to the market and compare your competitiveness internally on an ongoing basis, just as jobs change, and to change jobs as opposed to just being stagnant on the jobs internally. There's things happening with jobs on a year-to-year basis that need to be modified, as opposed to waiting 2 or 3 years.
When you do your comparison with other counties or whatever, do you base it on the job title, description, or the actual job duties?
Actually more. So
Maintenance tech, it
right.
can be a wide range.
That's a good.
That's correct. So what we do is we take your position title, we take the purpose statement, we take the education and experience requirements and build a little profile for that job so that we're not looking at just title alone. And that helps us better match with the market. So that way we're not guessing. We try to eliminate the guessing on the matching to the market.
Jake, or Rich, are you all on? Mazzucato? Oh, Jake.
Yes, sir.
What is your competitive market? Where are you seeing, what counties are we getting employees from, and what counties are we losing employees to in the jail, from the jail?
It's crazy right now, Judge. I've got a couple from Shelby County this year, and I've lost several to Woodford County. Woodford County went to $17 an hour back during our budget session, and then last week they went to $18 an hour. They're smaller, but they're coming up with funds somewhere, and so it's I don't want to say revolving door, but I'm getting some from other places and losing some to others.
What about Scott County? Are they in competition too?
They're relatively close. I think they're in the $16 range. I don't remember exactly what it is, but we trade employees sometimes too. But we went to $15 an hour and we were proud of ourselves for about a month. And then everybody else moved on. So it's, it's an everyday battle.
Okay.
Judge, this is Betty Jo. I want to go and throw this out here just because of the research I've done and the information that I have of losing employees. I'm just going to throw this out here. I don't know if it's a good time or not. Anybody can correct me if they want. I've got so far that I would like to see what we compare to is the city, Frankfort Plant Board, state, Scott County, Shelby County, and Woodford. Those is what that is glaring to me, that's standing out. Not so much the state, to be honest, because they have thousands of employees, but my top 1, 2, 3, my top 5 pick is just what I based on in the population is again, Frankfort Plant Board, the city, Scott County, Shelby County, and Woodford County. If anybody.
Why Woodford?
Well, the jail is right there.
Population, I think it's around 50,000.
Woodford,
No, it's not quite that.
Okay, it's not that.
22. That sounds like Anderson.
Well, obviously, the jail is one piece for Woodford.
Yeah.
They're already $3 an hour more than us. So with the fire chief, either Brian or Kevin, who do you compete with from the fire department? Obviously the city, and who else?
All right.
The city, Scott County is a big one. Some other departments that we've lost employees to just during my time here, Georgetown Fire Department. We've had 1 or 2 go to Lexington, Richmond. So with the schedule that we have, they can actually travel a little further away from here if the pay is what they're looking for.
Mhm. Okay. City's big though, cities,
Yeah, the city is a big competitor for us here locally.
yeah. Okay. Any other department heads wanna speak up on competition? Stephen, or you all aren't seeing a lot of that, are you? Stephen Hawkinsmith? Sorry.
No, Judge. We have very little turnover here.
Good, okay. Squire Muller?
Thank you, Judge. I guess the couple of things that I worry a little bit, I mean, Scott County, they have Toyota. It's gonna be hard to compete with that, you know. Woodford, you have horse farms, and then I think everybody knows that Shelbyville's basically become a suburb of Louisville. So just wanted to throw that out there. I think they're gonna be hard to compete with some of those cities and counties.
Yeah, but you still have to kind of put them in there, I would assume, would you? Yeah,
Probably.
you have to put them in there, or we don't really get a.
Right.
Right.
Another source that we use is the Department of Labor. And for this area, it'll pick up what we call the metro, and it would be Lexington and Frankfurt. I'll go in to that database and see if Frankfurt stands alone. But my thinking is that it would be probably picked up as a Frankfurt, Lexington metro. But what it represents is all labor, private, public, all labor. Anybody paying taxes has to report to the government. And so we have access to the Department of Labor, looking at positions and pay, current pay. So we'll use that as one of the resources.
Okay. Okay, is next step, or where are we, Betty, on this, in this presentation?
If basically this is time to ask questions, we have until 11, the next one-on-one is at 11. But I believe basically I'm gonna, if we don't have any questions, I'm gonna kind of sum up the process a little bit, just so everybody can understand. After today, basically, like I said, Mr. Johansson will be meeting with elected officials and the department heads on their job descriptions to see if there's some things that they already know that needs to be changed and so forth. After that, the department heads will look at their job description. Because again, I want to express this. Some of these job descriptions has never been updated since they was created years ago. Okay, so I explained it because when Mr. Johansson received these job descriptions, actually some departments didn't even have a job description. And they created their job descriptions and sent them to Mr. Johansson. So this is kind of the second step, so forth. After that, the department heads will sit down with the employees and to make sure they've captured everything. And of course, like you said, we don't go by task. We can have 50 tasks of employees. They may fall within the current job description, or we may need to revise those. After that, we will send those to Mr. Johansson, and he will make sure they are still evaluated correctly. And then.
What do you mean evaluated?
Well, basically, if something changed that's not in someone's job description, just because it's outdated or it never was put in there, they've just been, that position should be doing that job. It's just not ever been put in the job description, or a new job description was just created because the department didn't have a job description. I just want to make sure before he goes to the market, we have everything that should be in those positions. Then he would go to the market and look at the surrounding counties or population or whatever we decide to collect that data. And please, Mr. Johansson, correct me if I'm wrong on the process of it.
Yeah, you're correct.
Okay. And then after that, he will analyze the outside market. He will develop a job evaluation and compensation study report. Then he will review the job evaluation with the county judge and myself, make any necessary revisions and prepare a report. then present the final evaluation and compensation study report to the fiscal court, elected officials and department heads, and recommendations provided an implementation action plan. So, but I believe, Judge, correct me on this, after you're done with this, we would probably have a compensation meeting before to discuss with our committee members of
To review
the
the
final before we
plan.
take it to
Yeah.
court.
Correct.
So our committee members can ask all the questions and anything that we need to do going forward before presenting it to court.
Right. So from a timing standpoint, as far as the next couple of days, again, we'll just reemphasize what we're trying to accomplish with bringing the job descriptions current and getting that done. How much time can we give the department heads and elected officials to do that work? A couple of weeks or about 3 weeks?
What are you asking for? I don't know.
Typically 2 to 3 weeks.
Now, you know, we're right at Christmas, so,
Right.
the 2 weeks from now, which would start the 20th week, which is the week before Christmas, don't ask them to.
Right.
I don't want to put that burden on. We've got this week is gone. It's Wednesday. And so we got a half of this week and all of next week. And then after that, there's so many things that these guys are having to work with.
Just for my opinion on this, just to make sure I'm following the timelines that we said, I was hoping maybe by January 14th, the department head would be able to get with the employees on that. That gives us a little bit, a month, 4 weeks. I'm not for sure if that's okay with, but due to the holiday schedule and people being out, I just don't think it's possible to have it done by the end of the year. And plus, we've got a lot going on right now. So
Right.
I was gonna ask if that's okay,
What
January
day is the
14th,
14th?
on a Friday,
Yeah.
January
By the end of
14th. Would that give you enough time?
We're good. We're
Thank
good. And really, this is an important part of the process. So we don't want to,
You all good with that?
are you okay with that?
Okay.
Because we really don't want to rush it.
Yeah.
This is important because we want to make sure everything's current and before we go to market. So I think
So
we'll be fine.
what should the department heads, while we got everybody on,
Right.
what should the department heads be doing now to
Right.
upgrade this?
So where we want you to focus your attention is the purpose statement and the duties.
Okay, we need to say that to everybody.
Right.
Make sure everybody hears that.
So focus in on the purpose statement and the duties for each job description, make sure that those are current. And then.
Purpose statement and the job duties.
Right, and then any additional information that's not in there to make sure.
You're gonna go over this with the individual department heads on how, because
We will.
some of us, and I'm gonna use me, I'm not a HR specialist and don't know how to write. We've written job qualifications to the best of my ability. So you're gonna go over that.
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because we'll do that in the meetings.
Okay.
So that when they leave, they should have a good feel for what to cover.
Okay. Good.
So how do you, for job description, say we have an employee who covers the telephones? Maybe we have 2 or 3 employees that cover the telephones during breaks and lunches. And it's not a significant part of their duty. Does that just fall under other duties as assigned, or do you weigh things of that nature? If someone
Right.
occasionally serves as a
If they have
backup,
to, basically what
And-
she's saying, they fill in a role that is not really part of their job because we don't have enough personnel for an hour or something along that line.
and we have several of those, that someone like, in absence, maybe we've added a couple people to take credit card payments over the phone, which
Right.
never would have been their duty,
Right.
but we always want someone available,
Right,
and it doesn't happen that often.
so it's secondary, not primary. So we want to make sure that we get primary. And
Yes.
if there's room, if there's room in the 25 slots, if you will, for the duties and responsibilities, then it can be added. Because then, based on that comment, we may say, let's say someone was working as a bookkeeper and they don't have contact with the public.
Mhm.
And so we would just say no contact with the public. Oh, wait a minute, down here, this says that they are doing some backup phone call. So then we'd say occasional contact with the public. So it could impact the value of the position
Mhm.
because now we've added a component to that job that wasn't part of the primary.
So would you look at the frequency? So say it only happens once a month versus it's every
Yeah, so
day?
typically if it's a backup, we would go occasionally and sometimes we might go frequently if it's every day. If we're scheduled to do backup every day, then that's probably what we would call frequent.
Okay.
Well, when we categorize that as other duties assigned. the
Right.
last-
I was just
the
fixing to
last-
say that,
Yeah.
in my opinion, it's all. other duties
Exactly.
assigned.
And again, I want to create the balance between a task list and primary duties and
Right,
responsibilities.
right. And I think we need to be consistent across the departments on how we handle
Correct.
that.
Good question. Any other questions?
Okay, any questions from people that are on Zoom?
I've got one more question.
Sure.
So if we were using a supervisor and they had a large responsibility, and it's just something I've done differently in my office, they've had a large responsibility for multiple different oversights, delinquent taxes, land records. That person retired, now I've separated out those duties. Are you gonna take the general look that I've separated out and now this person is over delinquent taxes and has a different responsibility than they had before? And this person has a different responsibility because they're now over land records. I've moved middle management up and not replaced the head supervisor because that skill set didn't exist.
Right,
I no longer had that skill set.
right.
So now we've got a bunch of middle managers that have moved up to take individual roles. Will you be using that data to requalify, maybe even, I don't have the knowledge to say that that person is now worth an extra $4 an hour because they are middle management taking care of something that was oversight before.
Right. So it's organizationally how you're operating today.
Right, it's changed from what it was and what it has
Right.
been in the past,
And-
but it's
right.
obviously, I'm asking people to take on a stronger role of responsibility in that particular duty.
Right.
Even though this main oversight doesn't have to exist anymore because they're taking that spot.
Right, yeah. And that's
So I've
not,
divided it out.
and that's not unusual where we see in that organization get a little flatter because you delegate it down to a supervisor instead of a superintendent or a manager.
That's exactly what I've done.
And so it's the way you're functionally operating today is what we'll value.
Will you help us with that though? So, because I don't always even understand the value of that. And I don't want to be
What's not,
overshadowing or oversighting that I've now got someone taking a responsibility that I'm not really paying them.
right.
That's my fear.
What's nice about this is that we're basing it off of these factors, and these factors are pretty consistent from the standpoint of, is it a supervisory position or not? And then based on that, then we'll get the right value.
Okay,
But we'll need your input, scan, how many people are reporting to them, those kinds of things.
thank you.
Would you mind to stop your screen share so that we can see everyone that's on here
Okay,
in
yeah.
case others have questions? They have their hand raised because we can only see a few participants at a time.
Let's see. Can you help me with the? Thank you. Okay, any other questions?
All right, Jeff, do you have your?
Yeah, this is new
Sure.
for our department.
So new for us.
This is
Exciting now.
instead of guessing as to what we should be doing. And I don't want to do it wrong. I want to make sure our job descriptions are explained well enough that it works for getting the right answers. So we're paying people what a competitive wage is, and we're not just expecting results.
Right.
And not paying them for the results as well. So I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we're doing it. And really, we've all been, I'm not gonna say flying by the seat of our pants, but I'm not an HR specialist. I'm not a guy that understands the pay scale. I've tried to go out and I've done some competitive searches, but I don't know how to do them correctly. So even though I've done the searches, I've done my part, I'm glad to see that we're doing it with a professional that understands how to really dive down into what we're doing to try. So thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to working with you. You bet.
And a thanks to Jeff, Jake, and Rick Sparks, all the elected officials that really stood up and said, we need to do this. You were in our corner right from the start. This didn't start off to be a popular thing, but as we grow into this, you can see that how important this is to us. And where we were and where this is going to take us is very exciting, very good for our employees. So we're excited about this. So thanks for everybody for standing up for this, because we can see that this is huge.
Okay, I think you'll like the structure once it's in place.
To be honest with you, any structure we're going to like. But this is going to be even better.
Right.
So I know the employees will like it. I know the department heads will like it as well. Are there any other comments from any of the department heads or elected officials that are on the Zoom? Okay, I don't see any others, and I think everybody has spoken, and we're moving now to the next step. I want to thank everybody for watching. I don't see Squire Sebastian, Squire Muller, are you okay to adjourn?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're going to adjourn this meeting. We thank the public for watching. Been very informative, and this is a great process. And right now we're in the beginning stages of this process, but we're excited about what the end can look like. So with that being said, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks everybody for watching. Okay.
Thank you, Judge.